"Are you really that afraid of the basement?" my boyfriend asked, almost casually, putting on his button-up shirt. I glared back at him. "You're seriously going to bring this up now? I'm getting ready for brunch," I said grumpily, pulling on my bra. He shrugged apologetically. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I just want to know why, especially if it's such a big issue. We can talk about it whenever you want, but I'd really like to talk about it eventually." His tone was calm, filled with sincere concern. I sighed. I felt my annoyance slip. I'd been avoiding the subject for so long. I really didn't want to bring it up, but Timothy had been so great. We'd been living together for over a year now, and he'd been very patient with me and my phobia of dark places. I don't just mean I'm afraid of the dark. I mean I go into full-on panic attack mode and start tearing up the walls with my bare hands and fingernails and teeth if I even get closed into a dark place. It makes going out at night or doing anything normal, like going to the cinema or the planetarium or a bar or a club, very difficult. I have a nightlight in every room in my apartment, and so plenty of backups, plus the flashlights, the candles, the lighter, pound of fresh batteries of all sizes. Of course, my smartphone can also function as a flashlight. I could go on, but suffice to say, I'm surrounded by as much light as possible. This was also why we were meeting Tim's parents for brunch in broad daylight, and not for dinner. Never dinner. I didn't leave the house once it got too close to sunset. I mostly drive wherever I need to go. Taking public transport is too risky, and I don't travel very much or very far. I also can't go into a bathroom that has no natural light and nothing but motion sensor-based lights. If they go out for just a few seconds, my heart races, my blood boils from fear, and my lungs burn with panic. I scream and run, crying usually until I'm back in the light. I'm very lucky to have Tim around. Unlike my previous boyfriends, he never made snide remarks about my phobia, even when it disrupts his schedule. His effortless patience was a stark contrast to my previous relationships. I'd never seen him so much as raise his voice. I slowly sat on the edge of the bed. "Okay, I'll tell you why. Right now, actually, if you'd like. I'd rather just spit it out. We have a few minutes, and it's not a very long story anyway." Timothy quickly pulled on his sock and came to sit next to me. I looked at him and then looked back down at the bed. I've never told this to anybody, but the reason I'm so afraid of the dark, of being alone, is because of what happened to me in the basement when I was 10 years old. I paused, and Tim took my hand. His fingers were rough and warm. I'd never had issues with the dark or the basement or anything like that before. One day my mom asked me to go down and fetch the laundry from the dryer. So I've been down in the basement of this house a billion times, and I think nothing of it at all. The door creaks loudly, just like normal, as I open it. I lazily walked down the steps and was busy messing around with my new Walkman when I suddenly heard the door slam shut behind me. I yelled and was plunged into darkness, so pure I thought I'd gone blind. I groped in the dark for the light switch. I heard it click as the light bulb buzzed to life noisily. As I spoke, I could feel my heart begin to accelerate. I could picture that basement now, that bare light bulb. My hands shook. Tim noticed this and began to caress my hands comfortingly. I continued. The basement wasn't that big or fancy. Nothing but bare concrete. We used it to store some old furniture and photo albums. Of course, we kept our laundry down there, too. I was a bit spooked by the door slamming, so I decided to get the chore over with fast. However, as my bare foot left the last step and touched the cold concrete floor, the light bulb glowed. It glowed so brightly that it burst. I screamed from fright, and I was plunged into darkness again. It was so quiet that the distant sound of my parents or brother now extinguished. All I could hear was my own breathing. I paused again to catch my breath. It's been a long time since I told this story. All the memories that came with it filled me with terror. I moved in the direction of the laundry. I waved my hands in front of my face, but I couldn't see anything. I knew that there was a flashlight in the drawer of the desk next to the dryer. I took a few tentative steps, expecting any minute that I would feel bright pain as it exploded through my hip as I bumped into the desk. I never did, so I started taking bigger steps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I realized that something was horribly wrong. I should have been on the other side of the room by now. A few steps after that, I should have been on the other side of the wall. Before I knew it, I was running. No, I was sprinting. I was hoping to be lucky enough to slam hard into the wall. It would prove my nightmare was a fake, but the wall never came. I ran through cold darkness. Then I heard a voice. Soft whisper. It was the voice of a man. There was nothing abnormal about his voice at all, but it gave me goosebumps. He warned me. He warned me never to return to the dark. He warned me to never tell anyone. My lips trembled, but I continued, my voice shaky. By then, I was beyond fear and incredulity. How could this be possible? Where was I? I yelped and shielded my eyes because it was suddenly blindingly bright, and I felt really cramped, like the room had just shrunk. Then strong hands were grabbing me and lifting me. I found myself being pulled from the wall. Tim's eyebrows shot up into his hairline at this point, but he remained quiet. We still have no idea how, but some men had heard a noise, and once they'd seen me, they rescued me immediately. They found me in a well that was hundreds of miles from my house, from that damn basement. I paused again, rubbing my temples with the tips of my fingers. I had to go to therapy, and no one could ever explain anything. Like I said before, I never mentioned what really happened to anyone. I didn't know whether I was more afraid of people thinking I was crazy, or if I was really more afraid of that voice. All I said was that I blacked out on my way downstairs. The therapist said I may have gone into a fugue state or something, which basically means that they don't have a goddamn clue what the hell happened to me. I continued to go to therapy for years and years, but it never helped. I felt I could never tell anyone the truth. Anyway, it all ended up in the papers, and my family and I had to move to a whole new town. After that, it was just kind of swept under the rug. People stopped asking questions. My parents never bring it up. They pretend it didn't happen. I like to do that too. So now that I've told you, I don't want to hear another word about it. If you tease me or prank me, so help me God, I'll dump your ass. I was trying to make a joke to help break the tension, but I could feel myself shaking more and more as I recounted the story. It had been some time since I'd thought about that traumatizing day. I felt tears from the corners of my eyes, but quickly blinked them away. Tim sat silently, his expression one of sympathy and concern. Wow, I had no idea. That sounds really horrifying. I completely understand your fear now. I'm feeling a bit less fond of the dark myself. He kissed me lightly on the forehead and rubbed my arm. I looked at him in disbelief. You don't think I'm crazy? You believe me? He smiled warmly. Of course I do. I can totally believe this universe is full of strange, unexplainable, sometimes horrifying things. He paused and looked me in the eye. But are you still okay for brunch with my folks? We can always reschedule, get McDonald's, watch some DuckTales or something. I smiled at him and chuckled. It's tempting, but no, we've booked a table and everything. Besides, it's too short notice now to cancel. Let's get going, okay? I I feel okay. It was a long time ago." Tim glanced at me in a way that showed he was wholly unconvinced, but he yielded. "All right, my dear. I'll just take the trash down quickly. Meet you downstairs." A few minutes later, I had my makeup on and was waiting downstairs on the ground floor. Tim had left ahead of me to take the trash to the refuse bin in the basement, and I'd expected him to be waiting for me already. But he wasn't there. I frowned, confused. Was he still downstairs? Why was he taking so long? I tried to keep my panic in check, but as the minutes ticked by, my heart began to thump loudly. No. There's no such thing as the dark place. There's no such thing as the monster in the basement. I stammered to myself softly as I tried to force the panic back down into the recesses of my stomach. He's I couldn't end that thought. What if by telling him the truth I put him in danger? The voice had said not to tell anyone. I thought that he would only be angry at me, but now I'm starting to think otherwise. My blood was electrified with terror as I took a small step towards the stairs. The stairway was curved so that the door was hidden. I cranked my neck and peered around the corner. The large metal basement door was shut. Tim, is everything okay?" My voice shook slightly as I spoke, but it was firm and loud. Silence pressed against my ears. I pulled my phone out of my bag. With the tap of a button, a small but bright flashlight switched on and illuminated the hallway. I turned the flashlight towards the stairs. With shaking hands, I took a step forward, started to descend. I halted after 3 steps. I felt dizzy now. Tim, this isn't funny. I'm really freaking..." Then I heard him. Kara, I tripped and hit my head." I heard him groan in pain. "I think I twisted my ankle. I really need some help." My fear instantly dissipated. Tim was hurt badly. His voice sounded really worried. If he'd been unconscious this whole time, he'd need serious medical attention. Shit, why had I waited so long to go check on him? Of course, there was no such thing as monsters. I hurried down the basement stairs and grabbed the door handle as I pulled it open. Complete, utter darkness pressed up against my eyes. I felt an unnatural coldness in the air. The basement door swung back and slammed into me so hard I felt myself fly through the air. I hit the ground hard and yelled with pain and surprise. The impact knocked my phone out of my hand, and I heard it smash off as the light went out. "What the hell?" I stammered, my head swimming with confusion. Timothy, I whispered into the pure darkness. I was sitting on the hard, damp floor, which was the only other thing I could sense besides the horrendous cold. My soft sobs and the musty smell. Then a gloomy light bloomed to life. My jaw dropped open in horror. It couldn't be possible. There, many yards in front of me, too far to be possible, a single bare light bulb was hanging. Its light was cold and small. It looked almost exactly like the light in my old basement. As I looked down, I yelled and began to wail loudly. Lying in the pool of light beneath the bulb was the mutilated, bloodied corpse of my dear sweet Timothy. The man who I had loved more than anything. The man I'd wanted to marry. The man who always made me feel safe. The man who knew exactly how I liked my coffee and pancakes. His gray eyes were empty as he stared at me. Gone was the perennial warmth and love. His body was covered in deep scratches, and blood soaked his clothes. Oh my God, he was dead. He was dead. Guilt, terror, pain, all kinds of things washed over me. Tears poured down my face, and I yelled incomprehensibly, pleading for someone to help. Without warning, another identical light bulb appeared before the first. My whimpering paused. Then again, And again, my eyes widened with terror. Soon hundreds of lights were blooming into existence like frigid miniature stars. The line of lights made a beeline towards me, with the final bulb flickering to life above my head. I heard the sizzle and hum of its electromagnetic field. I was frozen with terror, had no idea what to do. My eyes burned with tears, and I squinted. Suddenly there was a loud pop. A bulb had exploded, and I shouted with fright. I gazed down the line of lights and gasped. At first all I saw were the shards of broken glass and the remnants of the broken bulb above. It had been the bulb right at the far end. My gaze shifted. A humanoid silhouette stood beneath the broken bulb. My heart stopped dead. No, 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 no! I moaned softly, my brain unable to process the terror. Then the next bulb in the line burst, and the man instantaneously stood beneath it, one light closer to me. I screamed with fear and found myself clambering to my feet. I had to get out of here. As I struggled to stand in my panic, I heard another loud pop as the next bulb blew. Then the next one exploded. Suddenly all the bulbs were exploding, one after the other, louder and louder. I saw the silhouette get closer and closer, as swift as a shadow. "No, you stay the hell away from me!" I screamed as bile forced its way into my mouth. My heart screamed from panic. As I turned, I heard a soft, raspy voice say, "We warned you." Tears flooding down my face, I groped wildly for the basement door. I could feel someone standing right behind me. I yelled in delighted surprise as my hands grasped the door handle. I heaved the door open and ran screaming up the stairs. As I got out of the building, I continued to run and scream as I welcomed the feel of warm, sticky summer air on my skin. I'd never been so happy to see the calm blue sky and the vicious midday sun. I ended up being taken to a hospital by a bunch of cops who'd seen me yelling and crying as I ran down the street. My face, my clothes were covered in dirt. My knees and elbows were scratched, but otherwise I was unharmed. I didn't dare tell them the truth. Instead, I said I'd had a panic attack, triggered by going down into the basement to find Timothy. The police searched the whole building, but the only thing they found in the basement that proved Timothy had been there at all was the trash bag he'd taken down. This time, the police have no leads. I miss Tim so much. I feel a numbness where he should be. I keep expecting him to just be around the next corner. His parents refuse to answer my calls. On the other hand, my parents won't stop calling. Suffice to say, I can't even think about the dark without bursting into tears. Even if there's no hope for psychological recovery, I don't think it matters. I still feel like someone's standing behind me constantly. The feeling is especially strong when my back faces a lightless room. I'm never alone now. They're always watching me, waiting for me to return to the dark. I've kept all the lights on constantly. I've not left my apartment in days. No matter how long I wait, though, I can feel them. I'm not even surprised. After all, I had not heeded the darkness's warnings. I get the feeling those who trespass are never forgotten, and certainly never forgiven. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I shuffled through the stacks of applications on my desk. Another day, another pile of desperate people hoping to secure some fragment of security in an uncertain world. I'd been working at Everlast Life Insurance for over a decade, and the faces all kind of blurred together after a while. Young families, middle-aged divorcees, elderly folks grasping at one last chance to leave something behind. I'd seen it all. Or so I thought. It was late on a Friday afternoon when his file crossed my desk. Most of my co-workers had already left for the weekend, their vacant cubicles forming a maze of shadows in the dimming office. I should have been out the door myself, but something made me pause as I reached for my coat. Maybe it was the worn edges of the manila folder, or the faded photograph paperclipped to the front. Whatever it was, I found myself sinking back into my chair, flipping open the files of Mr. Ezekiel Thorne. The photo showed a withered old man, his skin like crumpled parchment, stretched over sharp bones. But it was his eyes that gave me pause. Pale blue and piercing, they seemed to stare right through the camera and into my soul. I shivered involuntarily and turned to the application itself. Ezekiel Thorne, age 92, no living relatives, former occupation, mortician, current address, 13 Ravens Lane. As I scanned his medical history, my eyebrows steadily crept higher. This man should have been dead 10 times over. Heart attacks, cancer, strokes, he'd survived it all. Now here he was, the ripe old age of 92, applying for a substantial life insurance policy. I'll admit, a small part of me was impressed. The old codger had beaten the odds time and time again, but the larger part, the part that had kept me employed at Everlast for all these years, saw only dollar signs and risk. There was no way the company would approve this. The potential payout far outweighed any premium that we could charge. So with a sigh, I reached for the large red denied stamp. It's just business, after all. It wasn't personal. As the stamp came down with a dull thud, a chill ran down my spine. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw those pale blue eyes staring at me from the shadow of my cubicle. I whipped around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty office and the ever-present hum of the fluorescent lights. Get it together, I told myself. You're working too late. It's time to go home. I hurriedly shoved Mr. Thorne's file into the outgoing mail and grabbed my coat. As I rushed out the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The weight of that gaze seemed to follow me all the way to my car. That night I dreamed of pale blue eyes and the smell of formaldehyde. The next week passed in a blur of routine. I processed applications, attended meetings, did my best to forget about Ezekiel Thorne, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the lingering unease that had taken root in the pit of my stomach. It was exactly 1 week later when I heard the news. I was in the break room, pouring my third cup of coffee, when I overheard 2 co-workers gossiping by the vending machine. "Did you hear about that old man who died last night? The one who lived in that creepy house on Ravens Lane?" I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. "Oh yeah, what was his name? Thornton or Thorne?" "Ezekiel Thorne," I whispered, my voice barely audible. My co-workers turned to look at me, startled. "Yeah, that's it. Did you know him?" I couldn't answer. The room was spinning, the fluorescent lights suddenly too bright. I mumbled some excuse and stumbled back to my cubicle, collapsing into my chair. It was just a coincidence, I told myself. Old people die all the time. It had nothing to do with me or the denied application. But as I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, I couldn't help but remember those piercing blue eyes. And I could have sworn I caught a whiff of formaldehyde drifting through the recycled office air. That night I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mr. Thorne's wrinkled face, his eyes accusing and full of malice. When I finally drifted off in the early hours of the morning, my dreams were haunted by the sound of a pen scratching endlessly across paper, filling out an application that would never be approved. I awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I realized with growing horror that the scratching sound hadn't stopped. It was coming from outside my bedroom door. Trembling, I reached for the bedside lamp. As the light flooded the room, the scratching abruptly ceased. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement from the hallway beyond. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, slowly, deliberately, something slid under my door. A manila folder, its edges worn and familiar. With shaking hands, I picked it up, opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, in spidery handwriting, were the words, "Life insurance application." The rest of the page was blank, save for 2 words stamped at the bottom. Claim denied. I let out a strangled cry and threw the folder across the room. This couldn't be happening. This was a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to wake up. When I opened them again, the folder was gone, but the faint smell of formaldehyde lingered in the air, and I knew with sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face the office, couldn't bear to look at another insurance application. Spent the day huddled in my apartment, jumping at every creak and shadow. By nightfall, I had almost convinced myself that it had all been my imagination. Almost. As darkness fell, I found myself drawn to my computer. With trembling fingers, I typed Ezekiel Thorne into the search bar. What I found chilled me to the bone. The first result was an obituary, dated 2 days ago. But it wasn't the date that caught my attention. It was the photo. The man in the photo was undoubtedly Ezekiel Thorne, but he looked wrong. His skin was waxy, his posture too stiff, and his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had haunted my dreams, were open, staring directly at the camera. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding. That couldn't be right. No funeral home would publish a photo like that. Would they? A soft thud from the hallway made me jump. I froze, listening intently. Another thud, closer this time. Then another. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps, approaching my door. I held my breath, praying it was just a neighbor. The footsteps stopped right outside my apartment. For a long time, there was only silence. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps that seemed to echo through my entire body. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Maybe if I played perfectly still, whoever or whatever was out there would just go away. Another knock, louder this time. Then a voice, dry and raspy, like dead leaves, skittering across the pavement.
"I know you're there, Mr. Insurance Man. We have unfinished business."
I bit back a scream. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening.
"You denied my claim,"
the voice continued, seeping under my door like a noxious gas.
"but I'm not finished yet. Not by a long shot."
The doorknob began to turn, metal scraping against metal. I watched in terror as it slowly rotated, defying the deadbolt that I knew was securely in place. Just as the door began to creak open, I snapped out of my paralysis. I ran to my bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I could hear shuffling footsteps in the living room, getting closer.
"You can't hide from death forever,"
the voice called out, now just outside the bedroom door.
"Sooner or later, someone's policy comes due."
I blinked, backing away from the door, looking wildly around for an escape route. The window caught my eye. I was only on the 3rd floor. I could make that jump. I had to. The bedroom doorknob began to turn. I didn't hesitate. I flung open the window and climbed out onto the narrow ledge. The cool night air hit me like a slap, clearing some of the panic from my mind. What was I doing? This was insane. I was 3 stories up, clinging to the side of a building, because I thought a dead man was trying to get into my apartment. I slowly turned back towards the window, ready to climb back inside and face whatever madness awaited me. But as I peered through the glass, my blood ran cold. Ezekiel Thorne stood in my bedroom, his pale blue eyes locked onto mine. His skin was gray and mottled, his suit the same one he'd been buried in. As I watched in horror, he raised one withered hand and beckoned to me. I lost my balance, my foot slipping off the ledge. For one heart-stopping moment, I teetered on the edge of oblivion. Then I was falling, the ground rushing up to meet me. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later. Multiple fractures. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. As I lay there trying to piece together what had happened, a nurse came in with a small package. "This was left for you at the front desk," she said, placing it on my bedside table. With a sense of dread, I opened the package. Inside was a life insurance policy from Everlast. My own company had apparently taken out a policy on me without my knowledge. There at the bottom of the page was a familiar red stamp, claim denied. I started to laugh, the sound bordering on hysterics. The nurse looked at me with concern, but I couldn't stop, because there in the corner of the room I could see a pair of pale blue eyes watching me from the shadow. This was far from over. The next few weeks were a blur of hospital rooms and physical therapy. I told myself that what I'd experienced was just a vivid hallucination brought on by the stress and lack of sleep. The fall from my window, a moment of sleepwalking, nothing more. I almost believed it. But every night, as the hospital grew quiet and the shadows lengthened, I could feel those eyes on me. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of a withered figure at the end of the hallway, or hear the shuffle of feet outside my door. The night staff whispered about the smell of formaldehyde that seemed to linger in my room, no matter how much they cleaned it. I was released from the hospital on a gray, drizzly Tuesday. As the taxi pulled up at my apartment, I felt a surge of panic. I couldn't go back there. I couldn't face those eyes, the room where I'd seen him. "Keep driving," I told the cabbie, giving him the address of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. That night, as I lay in the lumpy motel bed, I finally allowed myself to think about what had happened. If Ezekiel Thorne was really dead, and I'd seen his obituary, hadn't I, then how could he be haunting me? And why? 'Cause I denied his life insurance application? It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. A soft knock at the door made me jump. I held my breath, waiting. It came again, more insistent this time. "Mr. Life Insurance Man," that dry, raspy voice called out again. "You can't run forever. Your policy is coming due." I bolted upright, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not again. The doorknob began to turn. I scrambled out of bed, looking frantically for an escape route. The bathroom window was small, but I was desperate enough to try squeezing through it. As I rushed towards the bathroom, the motel room door creaked open behind me. The smell hit me first, a nauseating mixture of formaldehyde and decay. I slammed the bathroom door shut and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage the simple task. The shuffling footsteps grew closer.
Now,
Ezekiel's voice rasped just outside the bathroom door.
Is that any way to treat a client? We have a policy to discuss.
I turned on the faucet full blast, hoping to drown out his words. Somehow his voice cut through the rush of water, clear as a bell, though.
You denied me a life, Mr. Insurance Man, but death is a much more accommodating underwriter.
The doorknob rattled. I backed away, pressing myself against the small window. It was stuck, decades of paint sealing it shut. I clawed at it, desperate, fingernails breaking as I tried to force it open. A bony hand burst through the door, splintering wood as if it were paper. I screamed, a sound of pure terror that I barely recognized as my own. My hands groped around, finding the lock and turning it with a decisive click. The door swung open. I finally managed to break the seal on the window. I didn't even bother to clear away the broken glass before I started to squeeze through the tiny opening. The shards slashed at my skin, but I barely felt the pain. All I could focus on was my escape. I tumbled out onto the wet pavement of the motel's back alley, the rain soaking me instantly. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not daring to look back. I ran and ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing in a park several miles away. As I sat there gasping for breath, shivering in the cold rain, I tried to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't go on. I couldn't keep running forever. There had to be a way to end this, to appease the spirit of Ezekiel Thorne. With sudden clarity, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I dragged myself into Everlast Insurance office. My colleagues stared as I limped past, clothes torn and stained, face gaunt with exhaustion and fear. I ignored them all, making my way straight to the records room. It took me hours of searching, but I finally found what I was looking for. Ezekiel Thorne's original application. With shaking hands, I pulled out a pen and changed the denied stamp to approved. I filled out the necessary paperwork, backdating it to before his death. As I signed the final form, I felt a chill run down my spine. Slowly, I turned around. Ezekiel Thorne stood there, a grotesque smile stretching his decaying face.
Well done, Mr. Insurance Man, but I'm afraid it's too late for that.
I blinked, and suddenly I was back in my apartment, sitting at my desk. The insurance papers were gone. In their place was a single document. My own death certificate, dated today.
You see, your policies come due the moment you denied mine. Everything since then, that was just a grace period.
I felt a bony hand on my shoulder, and the world began to fade away. I woke up screaming, tangled in sheets, soaked in sweat. My heart was racing, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. As reality slowly seeped back in, I realized I was in my own bed, in my own apartment. It had all been a nightmare, a vivid, terrifying dream, but a nightmare nonetheless. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by embarrassment. How could I have let a simple insurance application affect me so deeply? I glanced at the clock. It was 3:07 in the morning. With a sigh, I got up to get a glass of water, hoping it would calm my nerves. The hallway was empty, shadows stretching in the dim light. I let out a shaky laugh. Get a grip, I told myself. It was just a dream. I turned back towards the kitchen, found myself face to face with Ezekiel Thorne. His pale blue eyes bored into mine, his withered face inches from my own. The smell of formaldehyde was overwhelming.
Sweet dreams, Mr. Insurance Man, he rasped.
Then with a bony finger, he reached out and tapped me on the forehead. I jolted awake, gasping for air. My bedroom was dark and quiet. No sign of any undead visitors. Just another nightmare, but as I reached up to wipe the sweat from my brow, my blood ran cold. There in the center of my forehead, I felt a small, cold spot, exactly where Ezekiel's finger had touched me in my dream. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the bathroom, flipping on the lights. In the mirror, I saw a small, perfectly round bruise forming on my forehead. As I stared at it in horror, I could have sworn I saw pale eyes reflecting in the mirror behind me. I whirled around, but the bathroom was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the eyes were gone, but the bruise remained, a tangible reminder that the lines between nightmare and reality had blurred. From that night on, sleep became the enemy. Every time I closed my eyes, Ezekiel was waiting. Sometimes he chased me through the endless twisting corridors. Other times he simply stood and watched, those pale blue eyes never blinking. Always I woke up to new bruises, scratches, or other inexplicable marks. During the day I was a wreck. I couldn't focus on work. I jumped at every sound and seeing Ezekiel's face in every shadow. My colleagues whispered behind my back, their concerned looks following me as I stumbled through the office like a ghost. I knew I was losing grips with reality, but what could I do? Who would believe me if I told them I was being haunted by the ghost of a man whose life insurance policy I denied? As weeks passed, I grew gaunt and hollow-eyed, the boundaries between waking and sleeping, reality and nightmares becoming increasingly blurred. I would find myself in strange places with no memories of how I'd got there, standing on the roof of my apartment building, or in the middle of a graveyard across town. As always, I felt those blue eyes watching me. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to give. In desperation, I decided to confront the source of my torment. I would go to Ezekiel Thorne's grave and what? Apologize? Beg for forgiveness? I didn't know, but I had to do something. The cemetery was eerily quiet as I made my way through the rows of headstones. The sun was setting, casting long shadows along the ground. I shivered, pulling my coat tighter around me. Finally, I found it. A simple granite headstone with the name Ezekiel Thorne carved into it. Below that was the date of his birth and his death, and at the bottom there was a single line. His claim was denied, but his spirit endures. I stood there, staring at those words as darkness fell around me. What was I doing here? What did I hope to accomplish? "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling foolish but desperate. "I'm sorry I denied your application. I was just doing my job. Please, just leave me alone." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of nearby trees. For a moment, I thought I heard a whisper on the breeze.
"Too late, Mr. Insurance Man. Far too late."
I turned to leave, my heart heavy with the realization that this had all been for nothing. But as I took a step away from the grave, the ground beneath my feet suddenly gave way. I fell, tumbling into darkness. The smell of damp earth filled my nostrils as I landed hard on something solid. As I lay there, winded and disoriented, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The scrape of wood on wood, like a coffin lid being slowly opened. A bony hand emerged from the darkness, gripping my ankle. I was dragged deeper into the earth. The last thing I saw a pair of pale blue eyes gleaming with triumph.
"Welcome," Ezekiel's raspy voice echoed around me, "to your eternal policy, Mr. Insurance Man. I'm afraid the premiums are quite steep, but don't worry. We have all eternity to settle accounts."
The darkness closed in, and I knew that my claim on life had finally been denied. I jolted awake, my heart pounding so hard that I thought it might burst from my chest. The familiar surroundings of my bedroom slowly came into focus. Bathed in the soft glow of early morning light, I was drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs like a burial shroud. For a moment, relief washed over me. It had all been a dream, a horrifically vivid nightmare, but a dream nonetheless. I let out an exhausted laugh, running my hands through my hair. I stumbled out of bed, my legs weak and unsteady. The world seemed to tilt and to swim around me as I made my way to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the lingering tendrils of my nightmare. But when I looked into the mirror, my blood ran cold. There, reflected in the glass behind me, were a pair of pale blue eyes. I whirled around, my heart in my throat, but the bathroom was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, they were gone again. I called in sick that day, unable to face the thought of dealing with more insurance claims. Instead, I spent hours researching hauntings, exorcisms, anything that might help me understand what was happening. But the more I read, the more helpless I felt. How could I fight something that shouldn't even exist? As night fell, I found myself dreading sleep. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Ezekiel's withered face, those pale blue eyes boring into my soul. I tried everything to stay awake. Coffee, energy drinks, even slapping myself across the face. But eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off into an uneasy slumber. The dream started as it always did. I was back at Everlast Insurance, Ezekiel's file open on my desk. This time, as I reached for the denied stamp, I hesitated. What if I approved it? Would that end the nightmares? With a trembling hand, I picked up the approved stamp instead. As it came down on the paper, I felt a rush of relief. Maybe now it would be over. But as I looked up, Ezekiel was there, his decaying face inches from mine.
"Too late, Mr. Insurance Man," he rasped. "Your policy has already been cashed in."
I woke up, screaming, thrashing against the sheets. As I fought to catch my breath, I realized something was different. The room smelled wrong, like formaldehyde and decay. I slowly turned my head towards the bedroom door. It was open. Standing in the doorway was a figure that I had hoped never to see in the waking world. Ezekiel Thorne shuffled into the room, his movements stiff and unnatural. In the dim light, I could see the waxy sheen of his skin, the sunken hollow of his cheeks, but it was the eyes that had me paralyzed. Those pale blue orbs, now cloudy with death, but still piercing in their intensity.
"Did you really think it would be that easy?"
he wheezed, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement.
"That you could simply stamp approved and wash your hands of me?"
I tried to speak, to plead, to reason with him, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't respond, pinned to the bed by an unseen force. Ezekiel reached the side of the bed, looming over me.
"You denied me in life, Mr. Insurance Man, but death is far more lenient, and now It's time to collect on your policy.
He reached out a bony hand, his fingers pointing directly at my forehead. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for whatever was to come. But the touch never came. Instead, I heard a sound that did not belong. The shrill ring of a telephone. My eyes snapped open. I was alone in my bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows. The phone on my nightstand continued to ring insistently. With a shaking hand, I picked it up. Hello? Mr. Johnson, it was my boss's voice. Where are you? You were supposed to be here an hour ago for the meeting with the new client. I glanced at the clock and cursed. I had overslept. I'm sorry. I'll be right there, I stammered, already scrambling out of bed. As I rushed to get ready, my mind was reeling. Had it all been a dream? But the bruise on my forehead was still there, faded but visible. I made it to the office in record time, sliding into the conference room just as the meeting was starting. As I took my seat, trying to catch my breath, I froze. Sitting across the table, his pale blue eyes locked on mine, was Ezekiel Thorne. He looked different in the harsh fluorescent lights of the office. Less corpse-like, more human, but there was no mistaking those eyes. Mr. Johnson, I'd like you to meet our new client, Mr. Thorne. He's interested in a rather unique life insurance policy. Ezekiel's lips curled into a small smile.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Insurance Man, he said, his voice dry but devoid of the otherworldly rasp I had come to associate with him. I have a feeling we're going to be working very closely together.
As he reached across the table to shake my hand, I saw the glint of triumph in those pale blue eyes. I knew with sickening certainty that this was only the beginning. The meeting passed in a blur. I nodded and smiled automatically, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. How could Ezekiel be here, alive and well, when I'd seen his obituary, when he had haunted my dreams and invaded my waking hours as a decaying corpse? As the other attendees filed out of the room, Ezekiel lingered. He approached me slowly, his movements fluid and natural, nothing like the stiff, shuffling gait of the creature that had haunted me.
Quite a shock, isn't it, Mr. Johnson? He said,
softly, his pale blue eyes never leaving mine.
To see a dead man among the living.
I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I don't understand. You were... I saw you. Ezekiel's smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a shade too white, too perfect.
Death is not always as final as people believe, especially for those of us who have certain connections.
He leaned in closer, and I caught a whiff of that familiar formaldehyde scent.
You denied my claim once, Mr. Insurance Man, but now I'm offering you a policy of your own, one that will guarantee your safety and sanity.
What do you want? I whispered, unable to look away from those hypnotic blue eyes.
It's simple, really. You'll be my personal insurance agent from now on. Every policy I bring you, you'll approve, no questions asked. In return, I'll ensure that your nights are peaceful, and your days, well, let's just say you won't have to worry about any unexpected visits.
I knew I should refuse. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, but the memories of those endless nightmares, the constant fear and paranoia, it was all too fresh.
Do we have a deal, Mr. Insurance Man?
Ezekiel extended his hand, his pale blue eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. With a sense of finality, I reached out and shook his hand. His skin was cold and dry, like old parchment.
"Excellent," Ezekiel said, his smile growing impossibly wide. "I look forward to a long and profitable relationship."
As he turned to leave, he paused at the door.
"Oh, and Mr. Johnson, sweet dreams."
That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares. But as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just signed away something far more valuable than any insurance policy. And in the shadows of my room, I could have sworn I saw a pair of pale blue eyes watching, waiting, as I descended into dreamless sleep. The weeks that followed were a blur of surreal normalcy. By day, I went through the motions at work, approving every policy that crossed my desk with Ezekiel's name attached. They were always for astronomical sums, always for clients with medical histories that should have disqualified them immediately. But I stamped each one approved without hesitation, the memory of those nightmarish weeks still fresh in my mind. By night, I slept peacefully, undisturbed by visions of decay and whispers of eternity. But the price of this tranquility weighed heavily on my conscience. As the months wore on, I began to notice changes in myself. My reflection in the mirror looked older, somehow, gaunt. There were more streaks of gray in my hair that hadn't been there before. It was as if Ezekiel was slowly draining the life from me, one approved policy at a time. It was nearly a year to the day since I made my deal with him, before he called me into his office. Yes, he had an office now, a corner suite with a view of the city. As I entered, I noticed the smell of formaldehyde was stronger than ever.
"Ah, Mr. Johnson," he said, his pale blue eyes gleaming. "I have a special policy for you today, one I think you'll find particularly interesting."
He slid a folder across the desk. With a trembling hand, I opened it. Inside was a life insurance application. My life insurance application. As the meaning of his words sank in, I felt a chill run down my spine. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading all along. Ezekiel had never intended to let me go. He was going to claim me, just as he'd claimed all those other poor souls whose policy I'd approved. But in that moment of terror, something inside me snapped. I'd spent my whole career assessing risks, calculating odds, and suddenly I realized Ezekiel's power over me was built on fear. Fear that I'd given him willingly. "No," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. Ezekiel's smile faltered.
"I beg your pardon."
I stood up, looking him directly in those pale eyes. I said no. This wasn't part of our deal, and I'm done being afraid of you. For a moment, Ezekiel's facade slipped, revealing the decaying horror beneath. But I held my ground. "You have no power over me," I continued, my confidence growing. "You're nothing but a parasite, feeding on fear and bureaucracy, while I'm cutting you off." I grabbed the file with my application in it and tore it in half. As the pieces fell to the floor, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me. Ezekiel let out an inhuman shriek, lunging across the desk at me. But his movements were slow, clumsy, as if he were struggling to maintain his form in our world. I dodged his grasping hands and ran for the door. As I threw it open, I shouted to the stunned office, "Everyone listen, don't approve any more of his policies. He has no power if we don't give it to him." Chaos erupted in the office. Some people screamed, others looked confused, but I saw understanding dawn in a few faces. Those who, like me, had been haunted by nightmares of pale blue eyes and the smell of formaldehyde. As I ran through the building, shouting my warning, I heard Ezekiel's enraged howls behind me. But with each person who listened, each policy that was questioned instead of blindly approved, His voice grew fainter. I burst out of the building, into the sunlight, gasping for breath. For a moment, I thought I saw Ezekiel's withered face in the reflection of a nearby window, those pale blue eyes filled with impotent rage. But then it was gone, fading like a bad dream in the morning light. In the days that followed, there was an investigation. Hundreds of fraudulent policies were uncovered, all traced back to the mysterious Ezekiel Thorne, who seemed to have vanished into thin air. The company underwent a major overhaul, with a new emphasis on ethical practices and thorough vetting. As for me, I slept peacefully for the first time in what felt like years. The nightmares were gone, banished along with the specter of Ezekiel Thorne. I'd learned a valuable lesson about the power of facing your fears and the importance of reading the fine print. Sometimes on dark nights, I think I catch a whiff of formaldehyde or see a flash of pale blue eyes in the shadows. But I'm not afraid anymore. After all, I know the truth now. No ghost, no matter how malevolent or cunning, can stand against the power of human will and a properly denied insurance claim. It started as a weekend trip to Las Vegas. A 3-day weekend was coming up, so my friends wanted to add spice to their lives, and Vegas was on the bucket list. Not mine, theirs. I wanted to stay home and watch old cartoons I'd bought from the video store. Maybe just sleep in that Friday. Maybe I didn't make it clear to them, or maybe they just ignored me, but they had already bought me a plane ticket and booked a hotel room. With it being too late to refund anything, and out of financial obligation, I couldn't let that money go to waste and be a bad, boring friend. We landed and reached the hotel before noon. I had 5 friends with me, and everyone was feeling the excitement, especially one, Sadie. Sadie was the group extrovert, the leader. She didn't suggest Vegas, but she sure as hell put herself in charge the moment the others considered the trip. Standing in front of us in the hotel lobby, she held a list of places for us to check out. I stood by and let her list them off, everyone casting votes on which place to skip, which place to start with, and which ones to save for last. What we ended up with was a schedule starting with the most fun and the physically demanding stuff, gradually leading towards the more exciting, unsavory stuff. I had already mentally decided to call it when evening rolled around, to avoid the clubs. I guess I am the boring friend after all. I will say this about Vegas. A lot of places were surprisingly clean. Don't get me wrong, we saw plenty of streets that looked like the physical manifestation of a painful hangover, but many were straight out of Hollywood. It's colorful, it's loud, it's a theme park that people live in. It was almost surreal when you ended up on streets that looked plain or ordinary. Men in suits, kids leaving school, that kind of thing. I guess I knew very little about Las Vegas, of course. A lot of it is normal, but still, I found it interesting. When you turned onto a street where the buildings looked like modern art, I knew I'd be in for a hell of a time. Day drinking, slot machines, live shows, you name it. I can admire the work and effort they put into all of it, but it just wasn't for me. When we had dinner at what I thought was a nice casino restaurant, until I saw the male servers were in very tight, revealing outfits, I had just about mentally checked out. "Hey, I think I'm done," I said, before the chorus of ahs could get any louder. "I'm tired. The flight gave me a headache and everything." "Take a pill in my purse," one of them said. I think rest is better right now. You guys have fun, though. Try not to stay out too late." I felt older with every word and excuse. I'm 28, and I was talking like I was 48. That being said, the amount of free relief I felt walking into that empty hotel room was criminal. and I must have felt tired to some degree because the bed I fell onto had my eyes drooping. It was the cool, soft Egyptian cotton sheets that had me feeling that sleep was the finest pleasure on earth. I know that says a lot about me, but still, it was pretty good. I turned on the TV and flicked through the channels, finally ending up on a new episode of How It's Made. Well, maybe it was an old episode, I don't know. What I can say for sure is that my brain was locked in, and as the sun fell behind the horizon, I was gone. I woke up to a call. My phone was buzzing beside my head, the vibration doing more to wake me up than the light-hearted jingle I had set for a ringtone. I said the name, Sadie. "Yeah," I groaned. "What's up? It's 5 in the morning. Where are you guys?" "Hey, you're really missing out." Sadie's voice was garbled by music. "We're up the road, towards the red place. We're in the club with the big green monster truck out front. You can't miss it. Come on." "You underestimate me," I muttered. I turned over in bed and looked out the window. The city was alive, even after a full night. Lights and sounds, the distant thump of music. There had to be some stellar muting in the walls because I could see that the party was not far away. I thought about going. It was the idea of missing out that bothered me a little, because I didn't think I was missing out. Yet when so many people you call friends say that you are, you start to wonder if you really know how to live at all. Maybe the happiness you feel from simple things isn't as potent as the happiness you get while being drunk in a club with your friends. "Screw that," I said. I knew that was a dumb way of thinking, but I also didn't feel that tired anymore. The least I could do was enjoy the trip my own way, and at that moment, I just wanted to go for a walk. Not in the streets, of course, but I did remember Sadie mentioning on her list of activities a walk thing just outside of town. I was the only one who was interested, and she didn't seem too enthusiastic when she had told us about it. I got out of bed and texted her, asking for the address, to which she sent me the Google business thing. No official page or anything, just a bare bones minimum. It lacked that Vegas flair everything had, and for me, that was a plus. Just after midday, I arrived at the place. I paid the taxi guy and jumped out into the heat. I always had decent clothes for outdoors with me. It was like my entire wardrobe. Yet the heat was still a surprise. I guess being in a cool car for half an hour would make it feel like stepping into an oven. The trail started a small collection of shacks, with one large building that looked like it was in good condition. It was painted an ugly yellow with small cartoonish paints all around it, like a cactus character, a tumbleweed, with some classic Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote thrown in for good measure. I don't think they were going for a cowboy theme, but that's what I felt when I saw the owner. A tall woman wearing chaps, a 10-gallon hat, and a checkered shirt. She looked like she had seen some things, just shocking the way the skin beneath her eyes seemed to bubble. Yet, when she saw me, she gave me the warmest smile. "You must be Cassandra, right?" she greeted, marching over with her hands outstretched. Yes, that's me," I said, holding mine out. She took and shook my arm like a wet noodle. "I'm not too late?" "Not at all. Some eccentric fellas are already set up for the first group today. There's still time to join them before they go." "Group?" "Yeah, I find it better to send people in groups. Less chance of people getting lost or bunching up on the trail. Better for pictures, you see." "Right. We also have a route for horses if you're interested in..." No horses. They scare me. I'll stick with the walking group." "Fair enough. I won't press you." I always hated when people said that. Nothing made me feel more pressured. Still, she was the sweetest lady, sweeter than honey and iced tea. I didn't say anything more and followed her to the start of the trail. There was clear signage with numbers near the fence and gate, indicating the different trails. The trail she pointed me to didn't have a sign or a number. The first group should be waiting there. She pointed down the trail towards a huge rock. They all set to leave in 5 minutes. Do you have anything you need? Water, hat, sunscreen, I said. Good. It's hot now, but it'll get cool later. Little known fact about the desert, she said, pointing up a finger as if she expected me to take notes. I knew that already, of course. I nodded and started walking up the trail towards the rock. She already started her march back to the main building. I was feeling pretty good, excited even. I love the oppressiveness of the desert, and I was hoping that being 20 minutes out of Vegas, I would get to enjoy the natural beauty of it all. There was a group of people waiting by the rock, but looking at them was a little weird. I mean, I don't want to show my ignorance, but I think they were religious or just had some kind of cultural thing going on. Maybe I was about to walk with some foreigners from overseas, or it was some kind of LARP group. I didn't know. There was at least 20 people there, and it was hard to tell if they were all men or not because they were dressed in robes from head to toe. Not flowing robes either, but a lot more neat and constructed. My first real thought wasn't, what the hell are they wearing, but how the hell haven't they melted? All but one of their robes was red, but the last one, which was black. He stood tall and straight, the first one to turn in my direction. Upon seeing them, I was already psyching myself up to say something. Approaching the group of people alone was terrifying. As you can guess, Sadie and her group are the only ones who adopted me at work. I was just happy they did, because I would have never gone up to them otherwise. Room for one more? I said with a forced smile. I was quiet at first, but I supposed it was better to be a little too quiet than a little too loud. The ones in the red robes turned from me and looked at the one in black. Please do. Have you ever been on this trail before? The man said. No, first time. Be sure to stick close and conserve your energy. It is to be a long walk. The man in the black robe pointed towards the desert, the distant rocks and the sparse foliage. It felt so surreal, but also right, like I had stepped into the adventure I wanted. Only something kept throwing me off. It was the silence from such a large group. When we started on the path, I didn't hear anything from the people in the red robes. The only ones I had heard speak up until that moment was the man in the black robe. He would speak to me every few minutes, usually to point something out, but the gaps between those moments were growing longer. Initially, I thought he was a guide, but it became clear as he drifted into the others that he was just familiar with the trail. I was too shy to keep the conversation going, finding myself just enjoying the sights. The range of colors was just incredible. So many people think the desert is just muted, dry color, but there are just so many different shades of light and dark. The vibrant oranges when we found ourselves in the ravine were stunning. We followed a stream in that shallow ravine until the trail opened into the desert again, just in time to see the sun settle beyond the horizon. The sky becomes like blood, the man in the black robe said behind me. I jumped, not at his voice, but because I thought I was at the back of the group. I wanted to keep everyone in view. A beautiful red, yes? I turned to look at him. He was looking at me. I could see his eyes, his pale skin through the slit in the robe. It was odd to look at because his hands were dark. Another culture thing, maybe. When I had finally registered his words as a question, I stuttered in response. Oh, yeah, I said, feeling a chill run down my spine. I took the hoodie out of my backpack and pulled it on. Amazing how fast the cold comes in too, huh? Yes. Do you think you can make the walk back? He asked. We should almost be there, so No, we are quite far now, he corrected. By night, the journey back should be quicker, but 5 hours seems about right. My heart sank. I thought we had taken some turns and were just about to see the start of the trail again over the hill. Yet, looking around, I should have been able to see that distant glow of Vegas. Instead, all I saw was dark, robed figures shambling ever onward into the desert. My water had run out, my phone had long since died, and I was hungry. My panic was stiff at first, but I began to hear it in my voice. Then, let's turn back, I said. You can go back. We're heading somewhere else, the man in black said. Is it close? Very, but you won't be able to join us, not as you are. He looked me up and down, and I wondered if he was referring to my clothes and how I stood out amongst them, but something in his eyes showed a different kind of disgust. It was like my entire existence didn't fit in, not just my clothes. His tone was growing more serious, less friendly. He was losing patience. At that point, I noticed a building noise, a rumbling which I mistook for chatter amongst the men and women in red robes. But as it grew louder, it sounded more like an uncoordinated hum, like they were all humming a song that none of them knew the lyrics to. Again, too late, he murmured, as it should be. So it is. Too late, I repeated. Mind where you step. Once your weight is on your foot, your choice is made. The humming had reached a breaking point in tone. The night sky became a lot darker. The stars, the moon, they vanished. The midnight blue became pitch black. A surreal void. It felt like something was blocking it out of sight, because that same darkness seemed to move wherever I looked. Yet the desert remained illuminated by some strange source of light. I could see the red robes against the pitch black, and I watched as they marched across the sand. I was overwhelmed by a sense of dread, a feeling of weakness. My whole body began to ache, and every effort seemed to strain my muscles and even my bones. I knew this feeling, the one bubbling inside me. It was many years ago when I was a child. I was coughing in bed constantly, day after day. That weakness kept me wondering how hollow I could get. I felt as weak and flimsy as a thin plastic bag. My heart, I could feel its every beat, as if all my insides were numb, and only it soldiered on. I was waiting for it to give out. The people in the red robes began to shed their blood-red fabric, naked forms that began to age and decay before my eyes. A space in the inky void ahead of me opened up, a shining white door, tall and thin. The way was clear, and I didn't have it in me to walk on. I was terrified. "Why are you scared?" the man in the black robe asked. "What awaits you is an end to the pain. Keep walking strong." He placed his hand on my shoulder and guided me. The people ahead of me were growing more grotesque by the second. I had no idea what made their bodies, so I was made to watch them unmake themselves. The skin, the fat, the pus, the blood, the shades of red began to turn blue and green. My head was burning inside. I felt dehydrated. While my body was in a state of shock and fear, my mind was trying its best to grip reality, to steer me away. The man in the black robe seemed to sense it, because he stopped walking and looked at me. With all my energy, I looked at him. "You cannot go back now. Your life is with them. It is only natural to pass over to the next plane." I felt the heat of my tears. It was just like those nights years ago. The very real fear of death. I'm ashamed of it now, but I wasn't thinking of my loved ones, not even my family. I didn't think of all the wrongs I'd done, the regrets I had. When I looked into that man's eyes, all I thought was, why now? The man seemed to sigh, but I didn't hear the exhale. His shoulders slumped and the humming faded completely. The shambling corpses turned around to look back at me with their empty eye sockets. The dead must be laid to rest. It is only natural. The earth will bind the body and free the spirit. The man in black grabbed both my shoulders, twisting me around, and began to lay me on the ground as if I weighed nothing. I couldn't move. I could only watch as he began to scoop sand with his hands over me. I heard the rumbling again, but it sounded angry. I looked up as far as I could. It made my neck ache. I could see the world upside down, the white arch, and the silhouettes of the dead against the divine light. The corpses were moving closer, and they radiated malice. More tears, and even a pathetic whimper. "Hush," the man in the black robe said. "They are not upon you yet." He was working fast, and only a few seconds later, I could feel sand over every inch of my body. He finished by pouring the sand over my face, covering me completely. I heard the dead close in. I heard a muttering of words, then I heard his scream. I try not to imagine the pain one must feel to make those sounds. He was still alive, but his cries grew further away as they carried him towards the white arch. I could gather that much from what I heard. As his voice faded, the rumbling ceased and strength returned to my body. I could breathe, and I was breathing in sand, was choking, gasping. I sat up, coughing and sputtering. I noticed immediately the pink and purple hue of the sky. On my back, I felt the warmth of the morning sun. Looking all around, I saw nothing. No dead people, no man in black, no inky sky, no white arch. All the evidence I had was the blood on the sand, and it's trailing off before stopping completely. I found a road and somebody to point me in the direction of Vegas, but they weren't willing to give me a lift back. Luckily, after an hour or two of walking, someone else did. I watched as we drove past the road leading to the yellow building where the trail began. I think I even saw Dorothy talking to a group of tourists. When I arrived at the hotel, I dug my room key out of my sandy backpack and held it to the front of the machine. It still worked, and a few seconds later I was taking a shower, trying to let the hot water bring a little more warmth to my body. After a while, I thought about the man in black. He wasn't a dead man, not like the others. He didn't seem evil, but he didn't seem sane either. No matter what the conclusion I made about him, I realized that he saved my life, and he paid the price for it. It was a thought that snapped everything into place, and I cried in the shower as all the feelings rushed at me once again. I spoke about this experience to only one person, a priest. I don't think he believed a word I said, not really. I think he thought I was talking about a dream or a nightmare. Yet he showed enough concern to say something wise and biblical about sacrifice. It wasn't his words that convinced me to redefine my faith. It was the thought of believing in nothing when something like that happened to me. It didn't sit right. That's what I gained for the price that someone else paid. I pray that it's enough. It all started when I went to get some hair product I ordered at my barbershop. You can't get it anywhere else. The owner of the shop is Terry, a sweet, or so I thought, elderly man who owned the shop for 40 years. It was usually only him working there, along with a few odd others that came and went. I'd been going there ever since I moved to town a few years back. He always gave me the best haircuts. When I arrived to pick up my stuff, I saw that he wasn't in his usual post, sitting in a chair at the register. Instead, I saw a silhouette in the back room behind a curtain. I heard some pretty unsettling choking noises coming from behind that curtain, too. I thought Terry might have been choking, so my hero instinct kicked in, and I rushed to the back room to assist with what I thought was a choking Terry. As I was about to pull the curtain back, Terry came out at an extreme speed and said he was choking on a sandwich for a second, but it had come back up. I felt relieved, but also a little confused. Terry looked frazzled, unkempt, sweaty, like he had just gotten in a fight or been lost in the forest for a couple of days. He brushed it off and gave me my hair product. He also threw in a shampoo, which was enjoyable, until it felt like Terry was digging into my scalp really hard with long, sharp nails. When I went home, I checked in the mirror to see if Terry had done any damage, and sure enough, there were quite a few scratches. They were almost like cat scratches, but nothing too major. I doused the top of my head with isopropyl alcohol, and it burned like hell. I hoped that I didn't have any infection from that old man. I processed the strange occurrence at the barbershop as I drifted off to sleep that night. The second occurrence is when things started to get really strange. It was my next appointment at the shop, about a few weeks after my previous appointment, to grab some hair product. I came in expecting Terry to be at his usual spot, but once again he was absent. I noticed there was no one else in the shop, except for Terry, sitting on one of the chairs, looking into the mirror with a maniacal look on his face. I went up to him and called his name to try to get his attention. He didn't move. I put my hand on his shoulder and looked closely at his face, his eyes looking bloodshot and his pupils extremely dilated. I shuddered as I looked at him. Soon after I put my hand on him, he suddenly lunged out of the chair towards me, knocking me to the floor. He almost had me pinned to the ground. His eyes were murderous, and his smile was even bigger as he brought a pair of scissors from his hand and put them close to my neck. Then suddenly he froze, and I too was frozen in sheer terror. I was stuck there for a bit, staring into the lifeless eyes of this old fella that I'd really come to like. After I finally came to my senses, Terry was still just frozen over the top of me. I got out from under him and ran as fast as I could for the door. After I got home that day, I was high-strung. I was cursing, throwing things across the house, and pacing back and forth for hours. What in the hell should I do? I asked myself. The cops really wouldn't believe that a sweet old man, always kind, smiling, and telling stories while he cut your hair, would act like Chucky from Child's Play. Hell, most of the police force probably got their hair cut by him, as there were only 3 barbershops that I knew of in town. Then the thought of a paranormal experience popped into my head. This isn't a movie. There's no way that can actually happen. Maybe he had gone senile. His brain had rotten, and he had gone mad. I tried to stop myself thinking about Terry's delirious behavior, and finally got to bed. I ended up doing it anyway. I phoned the police the next day and told them the gist of what had happened, how Terry had tried to assault me with a pair of scissors. They had me come down to the shop for their investigation, because I was the only witness. When I got there, I told them in great detail what had happened the day before. When I finished the story, I could tell that they didn't really believe me. Terry was the only one at the shop when the police arrived, and he seemed to be back to his usual sweet old man self, contrary to the demon I had encountered just the day before. For the safety of the public, I had them try and get a search warrant for the shop. I mainly just wanted them to search the back room, where I'd heard that odd noise. They succeeded and searched the shop, but they ended up finding nothing incriminating, even in that back room. I had figured that would happen. They wouldn't find any dirt on Terry, and I would likely look like a suspicious fool. Bringing the police into this probably just further influenced Terry's unprompted rage against me. I wondered if when I heard those noises from the back room and went to investigate, maybe I saw or heard something I wasn't supposed to. When it was all said and done in the shop, I was in an interview with the police again. I abruptly felt the piercing gaze of something and averted my eyes from the officer. Standing in the shop window was Terry, his pupils the size of dimes and an unnatural cannibalistic grin on his face. It made me let out a shriek, and the officer looked at me concerned. "You all right, son?" "Yeah, just a sharp pain in my leg." My eyes again drifted back to the spot where Terry had been standing, but he was no longer there. The officer then looked to where I was looking. "What you looking at, kid?" "Nothing. I thought I saw a reflection or something, but it's not there anymore." I wrapped up the interview as quickly as possible, as I knew it was a waste of time. At that point, I knew that Terry wanted to settle this man-to-man. I was going to have to take matters into my own hands, it appeared. I went home and began planning, trying to build up the strength to go back to the barbershop from hell. When I was finally ready, I grabbed a camera for capturing evidence and a knife for self-protection. I didn't want to bring anything else as to remain a little inconspicuous. I went late at night, as I had the feeling that Terry knew I was coming. He would leave the door unlocked for me. I knew now that whatever Terry was, he sure wasn't human, or at least he wasn't anymore. When I arrived at the shop, my intuition proved correct. The door was indeed unlocked. As I entered, I suddenly wondered what had happened to that sweet old man who used to cut my hair. What had happened to him? Was he faking it all along, or had something done away with the kind old man I remembered? I quickly brushed the thought away when I saw the shop was pitch black, except for a faint, glimmering light coming from behind the curtain leading to the back room. I regretted not bringing a flashlight. The atmosphere was eerie, and it gave me the chills. I slowly walked to the red curtain, expecting something wicked on the other side. I cringed as I quickly pulled it aside, but there was nothing. The lone light source was coming from a few candles on a table, melted wax all over it. I began searching in the back area. It had a wooden floor with a couple of stalls, dirty rags and hair scattered all across the floor. After searching for a few minutes and finding nothing, I was starting to think about calling it quits, which, looking back now, I really should have done. I was on my way out when I suddenly heard a faint banging noise. As I went to investigate, I found that the noise was coming from the floor of one of the stalls. I kicked the dirty rags and hair covering the floor aside and lifted up a rug. Underneath it was a small trap door, cut to look flush with the floor. Wonder how the police didn't find that, I said, and snapped a picture. I lifted up the hatch to find a narrow, dark pit staring back at me, the only way down being a rickety ladder. As I descended the ladder, I realized it was taking quite a long time. I wondered how Terry, or whoever made this place, had managed to dig this pit so deep underground. As I continued thinking, I was interrupted by my feet hitting the ground. I turned around and was met with an almost pitch-black hallway, the only light being let in through the window of an industrial steel door at the end of the hall. As I made my way down the hall and reached the door, I braced myself, took a deep breath, and quickly entered, my soul freezing. It was like a butcher's shop. Dried blood covered the steel walls and the tile floor. There were 2 tables on either side of the room, covered in blood, hair, and gobbets of some animal. I started frantically taking pictures, trying to fight the sheer terror and shiver I was experiencing. After a few minutes, I heard the motor turn on. There was a conveyor belt system on the ceiling, like one of those you'd find in a dry cleaner. They were both moving. This alarmed me, and I put away the camera and drew my knife. After a short while, clothing began coming out of the conveyor system behind the wall. At first, they just looked like poorly made furs, but upon closer inspection, they were definitely not furs. They appeared dried with blood. The fur had been sewn into splotches, as you could see the hide underneath. I spotted a nipple on one of them and was revolted. That's when I realized that these coats were made not from animals, but from humans. The fur on the coats was human hair, and the hide was the skin from a torso. That's when I let out the shrillest scream I had probably ever made. I became frantic, and I was running to the exit. I slipped in a pool of fresh blood and dropped my knife. As I stumbled, trying to get myself back up, I heard the door that was on the other side of the room open, my scream probably alerting whatever was coming. When I thought my heart couldn't go any faster, I saw what was coming through that door. It looked like Terry, judging by the uniform it had on. It had a mask made of hair, with bloody teeth lining the mouth hole. It was armed with a pair of massive shears in one hand, and a straight razor in the other. We stood still and looked at each other for a second. I was freaking out at that point and was frozen in place. I wanted to leave as fast as I could, but my body just wouldn't move. Then the thing started sprinting towards me, and my adrenaline must have really kicked in, because I got up and ran faster than I had ever run in my life. I got to the other side of the steel door I came through and slammed it before the thing could get to it. I bolted down the hallway and started climbing the ladder, afraid it would break with the speed with which I was climbing. I could hear that thing breaking down the door that I had slammed in its face. Finally, I reached the top and threw down the hatch of the trapdoor. I moved a cabinet that was on one of the stalls to the top of the trapdoor and hopefully trapped whatever it was down there. I ran out of that shop in a dazed frenzy. I kept running until I reached home. I passed out that night, and the first thing I did when I woke up was call the police. I still sounded panicked then and could barely begin to explain what was going on. The police sounded confused, saying, "There's no barbershop in town that's owned by someone named Terry." I thought they were playing some sick joke, and I got furious with them. I convinced them to launch another investigation at that address, and they decided to meet me there. When I got there, my mouth was agape. There was no barbershop sign, nothing inside the shop, and certainly no Terry. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. I felt like I was going insane, and I bet the cops also thought I was a loony. I didn't even want to try to explain to them what had happened, because they seemed absolutely oblivious to it. I then remembered that I had the camera with the photos, and decided to show that to them. They took it into evidence and had the film developed. The film, however, had somehow been exposed to sunlight, and the pictures didn't show up. Even though I had bought the film the day before I went to the shop that night, the police wrote me off as some paranoid lunatic and thought nothing of the whole thing. It was almost 5 years ago. I've moved back to my hometown, trying to escape the torment of being in that place, where I almost lost my life in that barbershop from hell. What's making me write this, however, is that I received a letter in my mailbox today. "Hey Mike, it's Terry. I sure do miss you. When's your next appointment? I really look forward to seeing you again." It was sent from a Terry's barbershop, with an address in my current town. I never imagined that one sentence could terrify me so much. I'm sitting in my living room, shaking and listening to the tape on my Walkman, over and over again. I don't understand what's going on. Maybe you can help me. It all started last night when I was spending the evening with some friends. There was Sam, a childhood friend, and his girlfriend, Olivia. Cedric, a friend I'd made from work. Despite his shyness at the parties like this, he was actually pretty smart. Finally, there was Brad and Mia, a couple of friends I'd known for years, who'd already started arguing on the road. Considering the murderous looks on their faces when they'd arrived, they clearly didn't want to discuss it either. "Hey, what's this?" said Sam, pointing to the Walkman on my shelf. He stood up and grabbed it. "Is that a Walkman? Are you serious? I didn't know you'd become a hipster," he said, giving a laugh. "It's nothing," I said. "Just a cool thing I bought a few days ago at the flea market. I've linked it to these speakers, but forget it. Doesn't really work anyway." "Really?" he said. And with that, he pressed the play button. I already knew what they were going to hear. At least that's what I thought at the time. "Tell me, baby, why don't you love me? Tell me, baby." Wow, that's incredible. I didn't know you could record recent music with that. Been listening to that music on loop for days, said Sam enthusiastically. I was speechless. Been trying to fix that Walkman since the day I bought it. It already had a cassette inside when I purchased it at the flea market. For some reason, no other audio cassette would work. Even the original cassette, that worked a little bit, only repeated the same thing over and over again when I used it. Too bad. Wish we could have a little more fun together. I asked Sam to give me back the Walkman so I could have a look at it. Maybe he'd pressed something unintentional and had fixed it. I rewound the tape to the beginning and pressed play. Too bad. Wish we could have a little more fun together, said the charming voice of a man I didn't know. Well, looks like you got an admirer, Olivia teased me. I explained that since I'd bought it, the original cassette that worked had been repeating the same phrase over and over again, and that this was the first time I'd heard this song from it. It's pretty weird, Olivia admitted. She picked up the Walkman and pressed play, listening. Tell me, baby, why don't love me? Tell me, baby. I took it back, rewound the tape, and pressed play. The same smooth voice repeated the phrase I'd always heard. Too bad. Wish we had a little more fun together, it said. Cedric, you know a thing or two about electronics. Would you mind taking a look? I handed him the Walkman. He looked at it from every angle, puzzled, but still trying to come up with some kind of explanation. Finally, he took a turn and pressed play. I love you, said an older woman's voice. Wow, it's getting hotter and hotter, joked Olivia. The three of us took turns picking up the Walkman, and inexplicably, the cassette tape played something different. Still the same for each person, for all of us, apart from Olivia and Sam, who were hearing the same music. After a while, even Olivia started to feel kind of uncomfortable. Sam thought I was playing a joke on them, but it wasn't hard to demonstrate that no trickery was possible, especially with a retro device like this. Brad and Mia, who had remained silent all evening apart from a few murderous glances exchanged, had started to take an interest in the discussion. Would you like to try it? I offered, handing him the Walkman. Brad took it, and we all moved forward in our seats, curious to hear what was about to happen. After a brief glance at us, Brad pressed play. You fucking cheater! After recoiling from the tenfold increase in volume, we all slowly turned our heads towards Mia, who was standing right next to Brad. It was her voice we'd just heard screaming out of that Walkman. What is this shit? Where'd you buy this? Seriously, you've been fucking with us since the beginning of this evening. I'm sure of it. How did you do that? Did you use some kind of software or something? Spouted Mia in a rage. I didn't know what to say. I was as helpless as she was to explain why we'd just heard her screaming as he played the tape. She snatched it out of Brad's hand and pressed play. Her enraged voice came out of the speaker again, her face going white. I've had enough of this. Let's get out of here, she said. After that, Brad and Mia left. Couldn't do anything but apologize to Brad for the way the evening had turned out. I put the Walkman away and had a few beers with Sam and Olivia and Cedric, who had decided to stay. Clearly, the evening had taken a turn for the worse, though. We were all puzzled and still stuck on what we'd heard. Maybe it's the future we're hearing, Sam said. I mean, considering how often they bicker, wouldn't surprise me if that's the case for them, Olivia said. If it's the future, I don't know which one, because it definitely wasn't my grandmother's voice I heard, said Cedric. There was silence. After a moment, everyone stood up, bringing a premature end to an evening that had definitely not gone the way I had planned. I invited Sam and Olivia to sleep over, knowing they had some driving to do, but as usual they declined. I told them to be careful, then waved goodbye to Cedric, who still seemed lost in thought. That night I fell asleep with an uneasy feeling, and the certainty that I'd better throw away the Walkman first thing in the morning and forget the whole thing. When I woke up, I fumbled for my cell phone on the bedside table, but it wasn't there. I found it forgotten on the living room table, saw that I'd received a dozen texts and calls during the night. Couldn't make any sense of them. A voicemail had been left by a number I didn't have in my contacts. This is Sam's mom. I can't seem to reach you. Sam and Olivia were in a terrible car accident last night. They didn't make it. I stared at the wall in front of me, incredulous as Sam's mom sobbed into the recording. She was clearly having a breakdown. There was nothing left of the car. A truck ran a red light, apparently. There was only the radio, the car radio, that kept repeating the same music over and over again. I could hear it in the background when the ambulance was there. The words she uttered next made my blood run cold. Tell me, baby, why don't love me? Tell me, baby. I threw my cell phone on the floor. It was too obvious to be a coincidence. I'd already started to have doubts when I heard Mia's voice screaming in such rage. A murderous rage, to be sure. I've been pressing play and rewind for about an hour now. Too bad. Wish we could have a little more fun together. Every time I hear that phrase, I feel as if the suave voice of the man that I don't know is becoming more and more malevolent.